At Res for Africa, we stand for Africa. We believe in its huge potential. We believe in its innate energy. We believe in its growth. And we believe that all it needs is an enabling environment for its full development. At Res for Africa, we care for Africa. That's why we believe that clean energy is the only way to go, because renewables mean more affordability. Because renewables mean more jobs. Because renewables mean more value. Because renewables mean more resilience, social justice, and health. At Res for Africa, we join for Africa, a unique blend of expertise along the whole value chain of renewables, joining forces to accelerate the transition towards a sustainable and inclusive future. At Res for Africa, we innovate for Africa. We constantly look for new, improved energy solutions to provide not just clean and powerful electricity, but also cutting-edge and reliable plants, electrical grids that guarantee quality and stability through digitalization and storage. At Res for Africa, we act for Africa. We promote dialogue between governments and private players to define conscious, long-term policies, encouraging adequate investments. We share know-how with all stakeholders to promote the full development of Africa together. We train locals on the field to share our expertise and make them owners of their energy. And we never, ever stop looking for new and win-win business models made of African DNA. We are Res for Africa. Our mission is to build a better future through better energy. In Africa, with Africa, for Africa.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today in this webinar dedicated to the number 3 issue of connecting the dots, which is a publication and, more important, an analysis we want to share with you. 2 years ago, we launched the Connecting the Dots for Africa, and we found out measuring the situation in order to be able then to suggest the way forward, that only 2% of the world renewable deployment in 10 years happened in Africa, which is really impressive in negative sense. Then last year, we concentrated on the MENA region, and again, this was very disappointing. MENA region for 99% is fossil fuel dominated. And again, we made a measure and we made a recommendation. This year, now, you are doing this connecting the dots on Western Africa, which will be published on our website soon, and will has the 3 main issues you will go in a moment to listen. What happened in the last 10 years? What limited the growth in Western Africa for renewable? And most important, the time to act in the recommendation. Again, this is the starting point for us. And again, I want to thank the team by Luca and Daniele Guzzo, Silvia Piana, Daniele Palladini, and of course from Energy Green Power, and the team of Mathieu on Strategy Market. So I think we will launch, and today we are going to launch this one for your appreciation. We look for your comments, and of course, and once we get your comments, we will also physically print a paper copy. But at the moment, already tonight, you find this one on our website. I remind you that our website, www.resforafrica.org, has no password, has no registration. You just go there and download the ROB or whatever you want. The more you know about what's going on in Africa, the better for all. Luca, I think I was on time. The floor is to you, and have a good webinar.
Thank you, Roberto, and good morning, everyone. I'm Luca Traini. I'm the Program Manager Access to Energy at Friends for Africa Foundation. Today, I'm pleased to be the moderator for this webinar, where we are launching the third edition of this series of publication called Connecting the Dots. So in a time where we live in with organization and with a lot of focus of looking at trying to understand what would be our future, we thought, and that's why we started this series of publication. We thought that to better face the present and plan for a sustainable and future, we need to understand and look at our recent past and understand what happened. And particularly what we're doing here is to try to understand what happened in the last 10 years in the space of renewable energy, trying to understand what are the main barriers to accelerate investment and deployment of renewable energy solution, and trying to bring our view and of course open a space, creating a space for dialogue and for those who want to bring their voice and to discuss about how it's possible to accelerate renewable energy in different regions of African countries. In this particular edition, we focus, of course, on West Africa. As Roberto already said, we're structuring the work on what happened in the last 10 years, what are the main barriers for the acceleration of investments, and of course, our view and recommendation. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker, who is Daniele Guzzo, Access to Energy Officer at Rest for Africa Foundation. Daniele, the floor is yours.
Good morning to all. I hope you can hear me. Thanks to my colleague Luca for introducing me, and thanks to Mr. Vigotti for opening the webinar with his usual energy. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Daniele Guzzo. I work at Rest for Africa Foundation in the Access to Energy program. The objective of this program is to support knowledge building and the development of solutions on field to foster sustainable access to renewable energies on the African continent and the Middle East. I'm very glad today to be speaking among this panel of experts. In the time we have here today together, we will try to convey key messages and we hope insightful findings to inform the dialogue around the potential of the renewable energy sector in West Africa. If we start with the first slide, let me give you, yes, exactly. Let me give you a brief overview of the topics we are going to tackle in the next hour. As Luca highlighted a few minutes ago, this year's study aims at looking at what happened in the West Africa region, and in particular in the ECOWAS countries in the last decade with regard to renewable energies development. In the first chapter, which I'm going to present myself, we're going to see cross-cutting issues which are relatable to the vast majority, if not all, the countries involved in the study. In the second part, we are going to take a look at specific aspects that prevented renewable energy growth to happen, despite the enormous potential of the area. While in the third and last part, we will have a brief wrap up and we will draw our conclusions. Together with us from Rest for Africa and our colleagues from Enel Green Power today, which are co-authors of the publication, there will be external interventions from the European Investment Bank and the International Finance Corporation. And last but not least, the closing remarks from the president of the foundation and CEO of Enel Green Power, Mr. Salvatore Bernabei. So make sure to stay with us until the end of the webinar. When we started the study, we were asking ourselves, what has happened in the last decade in West Africa? Next slide, please. Next. And next again. So first of all, let's take a look at some of the general macro indicators of the region. West Africa accounts for about a third of the world continent population, which is on average very young and growing faster than in many other regions of the world. It also represents about the same share in terms of GDP, But the most important thing to notice and to keep in mind during the day, also when we show other graphics and other information, is that the countries within the region are, of course, very different. So we try to aggregate information and the inputs, but make sure to keep in mind that countries are very different. One example is, for example, Nigeria, which is the most populous country of the continent by far. And just to give you an idea, Nigeria, together with Ghana and Ivory Coast, represents basically 80% of the total GDP of the area. So this is just to keep in mind that there are a lot of differences within the region, within the West Africa region. Next slide. Talking about these differences, when it comes to access to electricity, we can see that despite improvements have been done in the last decades, thanks to development funding, decentralized solutions, and other policies put in place from the governments, West Africa still displays one of the poorest indicators of the world when it comes to access to electricity. Indeed, less than half of the population has a stable access to electricity. We're talking about 42% of people, and only 8% on average in the rural areas. Next slide. When we talk about governance indicators, which of course are not, let's say, the only indicator to keep in mind when talking about the situation of a country, but somehow gives us a perspective on what has happened within the country. These indicators are created by the World Bank, so they rely on an extensive data set. When it comes to these indicators, a general improvement of the 6 parameters that are taken into consideration can be seen, especially when it comes to the comparison to the performance of the rest of the sub-Saharan Africa. But in the last 10 years, we can see that overall the result is not so remarkable. It has to be said, on the other hand, that the region managed to keep a certain stability despite complex internal affairs issues. Next slide. This was a very general overview of the macro situation of the countries. Of course, in our study, you will see more details. But now with the coming slides, I'm going to lay the basis for one of the most important topics of the day that will accompany us for the whole webinar, basically. I'm talking about regional market integration, and in particular, how this can be still considered a missed opportunity for West Africa. Next slide. West Africa region is the second largest energy market of the continent, and as such, it holds potential to become an important exchange and trading hub in the continent. The foundations of this market have been put in place indeed, thanks especially to the efforts of the ECOWAS, in particular with the creation of the West Africa Power Pool and the ECOWAS Regional Regulatory Authority, ERERA. Nevertheless, the West African Power Pool is not fully operational yet. Next slide. In this scenario, it is very interesting to put our focus on the opportunity underneath the development of a functional regional market, since both energy importing and energy exporter countries could benefit from the regional integration. Just to make it simple in few words, countries with energy surplus could export more, while countries with a lot of imported energy could benefit from cheaper electricity. The World Bank, for example, estimated that the yearly savings with an integrated market could reach $5 to $8 billion a year. That, of course, could be reinvested for example, in infrastructure. Next slide. Let's say that to reach the objective of having an integrated market, it is paramount to act on the infrastructure, which currently suffers from multiple losses. We can mention, of course, technical, non-technical losses. Namely, we normally talk about frauds when we speak about non-technical losses, and collection losses from the utilities. The infrastructure remains the key, let's say, to operationalize the West African power pool, and therefore reap the benefits of the regional integration. Next slide, please. In our Connecting the Dots series, we of course analyze the power sector, and in particular the energy development of the region in the last 10 years. But this year we wanted to add a small section related to the off-grid segment, because we believe that its contribution to the access to electricity could be determinant in the near future for this area. Next slide, please. In particular, we have seen that in the last 10 years, with the fall of PV systems cost, paired with the diffusion of more and more innovative business models, such as the pay-as-you-go model, but there are many others, the off-grid market segment has gained momentum, especially when it comes to solar lights and solar home systems. The number of mini-grids operating in West Africa is quite high, is 385, with a total power of about 30 megawatt, which in terms of people accessing electricity counts for about 10 million more. Despite this, it is important to mention that, of course, the centralized energy solution has proven to be an efficient tool to enlarge access to electricity, but it has to be remarked that most of the mini grids that are put in place today were funded by development programs. Therefore, let's say these highlight how space for decentralized solutions is there, but probably still not very appealing for private investors. Next slide, please. Indeed, we all know that to reach rural areas with the national grid is very challenging for governments, both for economical reasons and technical barriers. This creates, let's say, a gap in terms of provision of electricity, and the decentralized solutions are candidates to fill this gap, at least a small share of it. The market for startups operating in the segment has grown incredibly in the last 10 years, by 20 times in just a handful of years, basically, reaching almost 400 millions in 2019. But let's say that the lack of economically viable business models and the access to finance still remain some of the biggest obstacles to the development of the segment. Next slide. As the aftermath of COP27 highlighted, there is an urgent need to discuss about transition, or as our Secretary General used to say, transformation, and the region holds a pivotal position in this sense. Let's try to find out why. Next slide. So West Africa is considered to be one of the most vulnerable regions of the world to climate change. Just to mention some examples, in 2021, temperatures in West Africa were 0.9 degrees above the period between 1981 and 2010. So keeping these 30 years as a reference point, and 1.39 degrees above the 30 years before, so from 1961 to 1990. In the last decade, the region has seen longer and hotter heat waves, rising sea level between 3.5 and 4 millimeters a year, as well as fewer but more intense precipitations. And all of these things are already happening. These are not projections. These are facts that actually happened in the last years. Next slide. When it comes to what could happen in the future, we can see that in a 2 degrees scenario, these numbers could turn into an even more difficult reality for millions of people because of rain-fed crops production dropping up to 11%, consistent impact on the GDP of the region, and over 30 million people forced to migrate by 2050 because of the climate crisis and the impact of the climate crisis. Next slide. In this framework, it goes without saying that West Africa is also positioned to play an important role in a transition that is going to be a metal-intensive one. In the graph here, you can see the metals needed in the renewable energy sector, divided per sector and relevance. West Africa, being rich of many of these materials, will for sure play a central role in the transition era. How West Africa will position itself to during this period, it has to be seen in the next years, of course. Next slide, please. So our question is, will the region be able to exploit its position to improve socioeconomic development of its countries in the next decades? So far, only a small percentage of the global renewable energy workforce is located in West Africa. Of the 10 million people employed worldwide in the energy sector, only 0.5% are located in West Africa. So basically, we're talking about a few thousands. Having said that, to wrap up the main topics that we have treated in the first section of the study, we have seen that West Africa is putting in place some of the elements for renewables to be one of the catalyzers of a unique opportunity for the region to step up as a leading actor in the transition era. And we will see in the near future if these opportunities will be actually seized and if the dots will be connected. I will stop here. Thank you all for your attention. I hope you will enjoy the rest of the webinar, and I give back the floor to my colleague, Luca.
Thank you, Daniele. Thank you for your insights. I think we heard very relevant points, which really highlights how, particularly when we're facing, a more complex and interlinked world, how it's important for countries to be able to interconnect and act as more and more as a region, of course, to enjoy the benefits of integration. And this is particularly true for regions such as West Africa, well, with particularly diversity in terms of countries, of economy situation, but of course also in terms of their energy market. And also the fact that in a transforming scenario and very rapid scenario, it's key also the role of government, and of course the role of having in place a good governance, which is, of course, you need a good driver to drive a transformation. Beyond that, we also saw that how West Africa is well moving, particularly also in the sector of off-grid. We think it's one of the most interesting region moving in this sector, particularly in Africa. We see a lot of movements from company working in the sectors, and of course several projects. Of course, we all know that the sector is still not viable, so needs again support. But I think several actors are moving and stepping into this sector. Last but not least, of course, we have to talk about climate change, how the role of particularly the renewable energy sector can play, and how each country and region can have an active role, because we have, and countries have to take always into consideration not just the risk of doing things, but also the risk of non-action. What will happen if they will not act now? So, as we said before, this is not just a space, a webinar for presenting what is the result of the analysis we developed, Rest for Africa developed in collaboration with Enel Green Power, but want to be also an open discussion with other institutions that are key players in the market. And that's why I want to invite our next speaker, Jane Feehan, Head of Regional Representation for West Africa at EIB. Jane, thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luca. Are you hearing me loud and clear? I do hope so.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Always good to verify at the start. Thank you very much, Luca, for that kind introduction, and thank you to Daniele for this extremely interesting presentation, which we've just listened to. So my name is Jane Feehan. I am with the European Investment Bank. I'm the head of the bank's West Africa representation based here in sunny Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. And I'd like to start by expressing our appreciation for the invitation that has been extended to EIB to participate in this webinar, to contribute to this webinar. We very much appreciate that opportunity. During the about 10 minutes that I have to address the webinar, I'd like to focus on and very much in continuity with the presentation that we've just heard, this extremely informative presentation, I'd like to outline what the European Investment Bank is doing in renewable energy in West Africa over that 10-year period, to kind of, if you like, show an applied example of how these trends have been acting on our work in the region. So I'll explain a little and unpack the energy lending and the renewables lending that we've done in the 16 countries of West Africa over this 10-year period. I'll give a couple of examples of projects, and I will outline our priorities. I'd also like to emphasize the importance of partnerships in this field, and I will say a little bit about that as well, touching on Renew Africa and other key partnerships which have the potential to overcome some of the kind of persistent and quite complex barriers which Daniele has been explaining in the presentation. And I'll also give a nod to the future, because I know now on this agenda for the webinar, I am to be talking about the last 10 years, but I can't resist giving a nod to the 10 years ahead and beyond, because we in the European Investment Bank, we always have the long term in mind. It is our role to always have the long term in mind in our investments, in our activities, in our partnerships. And I can't resist the temptation of mentioning one or two key points regarding priorities for the future and where we feel we need to position ourselves already looking ahead. So, firstly then, so the European Investment Bank, we over the past few years have done a lot of work on orientating ourselves as an institution towards implementing the Paris Agreement and the European Green Deal. We have increased our climate commitment, our climate ambition significantly in the past couple of years. Some of you may be aware of this. We have made a commitment which we have been able to meet, of reaching 50% of all of our volume of lending to contribute to climate, both on the adaptation and mitigation side, by 2025. So that 50% volume target, we are already meeting that now, and we're already looking ahead in recent months, actually, the whole subject of financing the investment needs arising from climate adaptation, particularly in Africa. This has been a very active and hot topic, including in the recent COP27 meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and we in EIB have committed to increasing or tripling actually our financing of climate adaptation, because we're very conscious that significant though our volumes of lending in climate are, they are very much orientated towards mitigation across a range of different sectors. obviously including energy, but also transport and other sectors. So we need to do more on financing adaptation. That has been one of our key subjects in recent months. So we are already meeting our 50% target, as I mentioned, and we are now working towards aligning all of our financing activities to the goals and principles of the Paris Agreement, including our counterparties that we are working with on intermediated lending. So as part of that, we have reviewed our energy lending policy, and some of you may be aware of this. We have made some difficult decisions, and this is a topic which I would like to tackle head on. It's a live issue here in Africa, and it's been a big topic at the COP27 in recent weeks, and it is the issue of gas and exploiting natural gas. The European Investment Bank has decided to no longer finance hydrocarbon projects or fossil hydrocarbon projects, including natural gas. And as you may imagine, ladies and gentlemen, here in West Africa, where Côte d'Ivoire, from where I'm speaking to you right now, and neighboring Ghana, plus other countries, have made significant discoveries of natural gas in recent years and have every intention of drawing on those to develop their economies. And I'm tackling this potentially sensitive point head on because I think it is an opportunity to point to the positioning of this institution in supporting that leap forward to the fourth industrial revolution, and on supporting grid infrastructure, on supporting smart grids, obviously renewables, but also research, development, and innovation in renewables, and on battery research, and on energy storage generally. So there's a whole spectrum of investment needs where we are going further, doing more, and ready to mobilize, and are mobilizing on these areas, looking ahead to the future. So just that's a few little pen picture of the positioning of the European Investment Bank with regard to energy lending and the difficult decisions that we have taken in support of the Paris Agreement. So with that said then, the last 10 years, EIB in West Africa, what have we done? So in Africa as a whole, over the past 10 years, we have extended 5.6 billion euros of new lending to the energy sector. So that's 5.6 billion Africa as a whole, for the energy sector as a whole. Now, here in West Africa, for the 16 countries here, 2 billion euros of that have been invested over that 10-year period in energy. So that gives you the volume then of what we have been doing in the continent and in the region. Let me give you a little breakdown of how that shakes out across the different areas. So the largest percentage of that figure, half of that 2 billion actually, is on electricity networks and energy access. So this touches on the important priority that Daniele was mentioning in his presentation on realizing the potential of a connected West Africa energy market, and on building the energy market. So EIB is a member of the West Africa Power Pool, and we continue to be a key lender to many of the crucial interconnectors, which are bit by bit building that energy market across the region. And Daniele, I'm going to take you to task now on your phrase, the missed opportunity of realizing this potential. I'm not sure if we would go that far in calling it a missed opportunity. We would agree, though, that many of these ambitious interconnector projects are being implemented at a slower pace, certainly, than we would have hoped. But we certainly see steady, sure progress in this area on the construction and the entering into operation of many of these transboundary interconnectors across West Africa. So agree that it is slower, perhaps a lot slower than many of us would have hoped, but it is steadily moving in the right direction. And actually, I can think of some examples even in recent months where certain interconnector projects had been held back for political reasons, and which are now which are now going ahead, and the studies that had been done are being revived, and governments are back now discussing some of these interconnectors. So watch this space, because it continues to happen. So that's half of the 2 billion then on networks and energy access. And then just under 500 million on renewables, just under 400 million on rehabilitation of existing facilities, and there we have a couple of hydropower rehabilitation projects which account for a lot of that. The Kpong Dam in Ghana, for example, where EIB was one of the financiers of the construction of the original dam back in the mid-70s, and then we were also solicited to finance the rehabilitation of the dam over the past couple of years. So that would be the kind of project which is contributing to that number. And then finally, energy efficiency comes in at a modest 82 million over the 10-year period. But I do want to underline the importance of energy efficiency in all of this, because although energy efficiency as an investment need is a much bigger topic, and we're talking about much bigger volumes in Europe, nevertheless, here on the African continent and here in West Africa, let us keep that as an important priority now, as a lot of infrastructure is being built. A lot of built infrastructure is under construction as we speak. I look out my window, there are cranes across the skyline. It is so important to invest in an energy efficient building stock. Given that this region has some of the most rapidly growing cities in the world, and the pace of construction is fast, let us keep energy efficiency in mind. Although the volumes are modest in recent years, we think that is an area which will become a bigger priority, and also the bigger investment need volume-wise looking ahead. So that's then so much for the numbers, but then let me just underline then the priorities, and I'm conscious of time as well. So I'll just say a few words then about the priorities, and then partnerships, and then looking ahead. So on the priorities then, where are the needs as we see them? And I think you'll find this echoes many of the points in the extremely informative presentation that Daniele gave previously. So energy access. The fact that 600 million people live without reliable access to electricity in this region. So regional integration is also a key priority. I've already spoken about the West Africa Power Pool and our continued long-standing engagement as a member of the West Africa Power Pool alongside other lenders to build that market, to build that infrastructure. Then renewables. The clean energy transition is an opportunity for many African countries to bypass traditional fuels and infrastructure. And Africa has such abundant renewable energy resources, such as hydro, wind, solar. The potential is huge and has not been tapped. This is a point which has already been underlined. I want to though, on the renewables, just to mention one point which we've observed here in Cote d'Ivoire over the past couple of years. And that is that because we heard a little bit about the impacts of climate change in the region. One of the impacts here has been disruption to hydropower as a result of unseasonal droughts, or just lower rainfall levels per se in certain years. So greater fluctuations, longer periods of lower than expected rainfall, and the impact this has had on the functioning of some of the key hydropower facilities on which the country depends for some half of its power. I think that underlines the need to, it touches on the rehabilitation point, the need to rehabilitate some of these facilities with those revised, if you will, climate projections in mind, but it also underlines the need to diversify the renewable energy mix. And of course, the huge opportunity there is solar. I mean, here in Cote d'Ivoire and in some of the neighboring countries, there has been so much investment in hydro over the past decades, and very much as a pillar of the independence of some of the countries in this region. Hydropower was at the heart of the the building of these new economies a generation ago. But now we need to diversify. Hydro is indeed at the heart of the energy mix, but it's given climate change and given the impacts on rainfall patterns, that is definitely something we need to respond to and mobilize towards. And then the final priority, energy efficiency, I already mentioned that we are keeping very much an eye on that. So then in terms of partnerships, I think it is very clear that it is not only investment per se which holds back the realization of renewable energy potential in West Africa. It is also about getting the regulatory structure right. It's also about structuring these operations in the correct way. It's also about building a pipeline of bankable projects and the suite of upstream technical assistance and different aspects of work which is necessary to nurture that pipeline of bankable projects. And there are a number of partnerships which we in the EIB feel are very valuable in this regard to put a variety of shoulders to the wheel on overcoming some of those barriers. It isn't just about the money, it's also about the bankable pipeline and the regulatory regime and. So now we mentioned Renew Africa, and I do want to say that we in the EIB are very grateful to have been invited to join the Renew Africa platform. This was formalized by our Vice President Ambroise Fayol at the COP in Egypt. And the Renew Africa platform has great potential indeed to step up cooperation with European and local partners across Africa to meet these Green Deal objectives and to pool our different expertise to realize some of the potential which we have been alluding to in this webinar as regards renewable energy. So Renew Africa, we are delighted to be on board. I'll also mention, as it's very relevant here in the West African context, the Desert to Power initiative of the African Development Bank. And it's similarly inspired. So this is an initiative of the African Development Bank. We in the EIB are cooperating as part of this initiative. And Desert to Power focuses on the Sahel and on boosting hugely the renewable energy facilities in the Sahel, so aiming to establish a generation capacity of 10 gigawatts by 2030 through PV solar via public, private, grid and off-grid. So, and there are a number of different facets to that work, one of which is very much on the establishing the regulatory regime. And also catalyzing the financing for the projects which come through. So there's that partnership, and I will also mention Scaling Solar, which many of you will already know, World Bank and IFC, where we are working on also. So these partnerships where we work together are so important in breaking through some of the barriers. I will just quickly allude to a few examples of projects which we have financed in West Africa in the energy sector. I already mentioned the Kapong Dam in neighboring Ghana, which we contributed both on the construction side in the 70s and also the rehabilitation. And we've also alluded to the interconnector projects such as the OMVG connection interconnector. So that there are those major projects which we've already alluded to. But some other examples, the Boucle de Bamako, in Mali, Scaling Solar in Senegal, a very nice renewable energy project in the Gambia, which focused on public buildings, on health centers and schools, and on establishing solar panels on some 1,000 public buildings across the country. Here in Côte d'Ivoire, we are financing Côte d'Ivoire Énergie to support their investment program on establishing a new dispatching center in Yamoussoukro, on extending the grid in a number of cities and towns, including Abidjan here, and also on supporting them in putting in place energy efficient street lighting. And a final example I'll mention is Sonabel, a solar plant in Burkina Faso, just outside Ouagadougou, which we have recently agreed to extend. Now, final word before I wrap up, which is to look ahead to the future. And I do want to mention, ladies and gentlemen, the subject of green hydrogen. because the EIB has been working steadily on supporting a number of both public and private sector green hydrogen projects in Europe. Now, many of you will already be aware of what green hydrogen is. So it's using renewable energy to essentially split water and generate hydrogen as a clean fuel, which is an extremely inefficient way to use renewable energy. So in fact, in some ways, it is a really terrible idea, except where it is a good idea because there are no other options. That's to say, green hydrogen has great potential in some of these so-called hard to abate sectors in an industrial context and in a transport context. And we have now amassed some 700 million euros of signed projects in Europe in this area, both in public sector and private sector. And we have been delighted to see that a number of African countries have been stepping forward, showing their interest and ambition in becoming African leaders in this area. And one of those countries is Mauritania, where we have recently, earlier this year, signed a declaration on working more closely together to realize the potential for generating green hydrogen in Mauritania. I am very enthusiastic about this topic, and I could speak more about it, but I won't, because I know the time is not on our side. But I want to flag it as my nod to the future, that there are certain African countries where there is huge potential, renewable energy potential anyway, with low population density and with certain industry clusters already in place, where there is indeed great potential to generate green hydrogen and to use it, and maybe in the future to export it to neighboring countries. So on that nod to the future, I will sign off. Thank you very much indeed for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. And back to you, Luca.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. That was very insightful. It was very interesting to hear what EIB is working on, what it has been doing in the last 10 years in the region, and also generally in the context, your view of the region, the potentiality of the region in the renewable energy space, but also the new strategy of the EIB and particularly the way forward. And we really appreciate it to hear what and so many projects you are working on, and particularly also the commitment on the networks. As we know, as we usually talk about, we talk a lot about generation, but we have to take into consideration that on average for each dollar we put on or euro we put on generation, another dollar should be invested in networks. So it's very important, as much as of course the role that has to be done in the climate change, particularly in the adaptation that usually is somehow left behind in some cases, and it's very important for us to hear that EIB is also stepping up on that. So thank you again for your intervention. Without any further ado, let me introduce the next two speakers who will give us some insight about what were the main limitations to the growth of the renewable energy. As you can see here with me, there is Daniele Palladini, International Institutional Affairs, CEO Office at Enel, and following him, we will have Mathieu Ledoufin, Competitor Intelligence, Market Study, and Strategic Analysis Specialist at Enel Green Power. Daniele, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Luca, and thank you so much to Ms. Fina for this incredible speech. And I will take back some points that she already highlighted. So we have seen that there is potential in the region, but it's not happening. Why renewable energy is not developing fast enough? We will see some key points. The first aspect that I would like to mention, and please go to the next slide, is the fact that sometimes private sectors is not going where there is just the most sun and wind, but is often going where there is the most favorable regulatory framework. So for this reason, let's go deeper on the regulatory barriers that hinders the achievement of renewable energy target in West Africa. The first things that private sector look is if a region or a country has a specific renewable energy targets. And luckily, West Africa, as in 2019 within ECOWAS, publish a comprehensive power development plan that combines generation and transmission requirements with a target of 70% of solar and wind in the energy mix by 2033. As mentioned also before, the mix, the combined and development plan of generation and transmission is a key requirement, because if you can have a generation without transmission, it's not going to work, and the same on the opposite side. So plan, develop, and manage together generation and transmission is a key requirement. But as also mentioned before, and how we can see from the graph, the role of gas is remaining, and is remaining playing a key role and putting some criticalities on the system. So West African countries can implement also national plans, such as Ivory Coast, Senegal, and Ghana already doing, pushing and showing the international private sector where they want to go, how much they want to invest, and how much they are planning to integrate renewable energy into their energy mix. But still, if also there is a master plan, some regulatory barriers remains. And if we go to the next slides, we have highlighted some key regulatory barriers. First of all, a slow regional integration process. If we look at the numbers of West Africa, it appears that it's clearly a very interesting and attractive region, because the GDP, the population, the increasing population show how the private sector can really be attracted by the region. But if we go country by country, the numbers change. So our suggestion, what we look is that an enforced regional integration can just push the attractiveness of the region. And for sure, for the regionalization is fundamental a political will that support regional integration and to strengthen the Western African power pool authorities. Then we have roads to market. When we speak about roads to market, we speak about the practical way that IPPs and private sector can then sell the electricity that they can produce in your country. So when there is a feed-in tariff, it's very important that it's well managed, well implemented. If you are planning to launch tender and auction programs, it's good to be in partnership with multilateral institutions, and of course also allow IPPs to sell directly through PPA, private PPA, the electricity that they produce. Let's move to the tariff side, because also tariff play a key role in attracting private sector and to let them choose to invest in the region. Non-cost reflective tariffs create a bunch of problems. First of all, a financial unsustainability of the system, both from the generation and the transmission side. So it is very important that the tariff that the population, the local private sector must pay must be cost reflective, because they really need to show the value of the energy production and reflect the cost that electricity is replaced in the tariff. And then we have something that Ms. Fina already said before, so the critical condition on the infrastructure. Infrastructure investment gap in transmission and distribution sector, and the missing regulation to engage the private sector in this specific field is something critical, is something that is lower down the process of renewable energy integration in the region. Let's go to the next slide to see in details some of the overview of the existing regulatory frameworks in some selected African countries. As we can see, the renewable energy share, excluding hydro, is very small. So if in the power plan that the ECOWAS published in 2019, they put as a target 70%, it's just clear that the work to be done is a lot. So let's see how they can achieve this target country by country. So Nigeria has put out a target of 30% of renewable energy by 2030, Ivory Coast of 60% by 2030, and Ghana and Senegal moving from 10 of solar and wind to 30 from Senegal. So it's quite difficult to predict how they will reach this target, considering where they will start today. But one key element to attract private sector and support the development of renewable energy in the countries is the putting out supporting schemes such as feed-in tariff and auction or renewable purchase obligation, and support that with the clear and predictable roads to market. So in Nigeria, such as in Ivory Coast, Ghana, Senegal, basically today you can do a private PPA with a single buyer in Ivory Coast with local utilities on distribution company. But a more generic and clear framework to develop roads to market is really the key points to let the private sector enter in the generation sector. So without losing any other time, I leave the floor to my colleague Mathieu, that will explain you other key barriers to the development of renewable energy.
Thank you, Daniele. Next slide, please. So, in fact, one of the other difficulties that the region has to address is the lack of the interconnection and the performance of the grid. Also, that's not at a level expected for a reliable energy production. Next slide, please. So as we can see in this map, the interconnection in the region is not really developed. We only have some interconnection we can see in the blue lines in the region between Ivory Coast and Nigeria, and only on the east part between Senegal and Mali. So there's this lack of interconnection is kind of an issue in the country because of the lack of use of the trading, lack of use of cross-border trading in the region. In fact, only 8.5% of power generation in the region is trade cross-border every year, and only in Nigeria this figure is significant. The volume of trading is significant. The problem also is that most of the country face an excess of an unused generation, and when other countries has deficits of generation. So one of the key issue is that without this, the development of the grid and the development of interconnection would give the countries the ability to take advantage of regional synergy, and that would improve the reliability of the network. So next slide, please. So one of the main problems, one or two main problems of the lack of reliability of the network is that we actually have in the region a really inefficient and expensive network, and more of that. On top of that, as Daniele said before, the tariff are not cost reflective. So the root of the problem can be found in the regulatory framework, as also have been said before, and particularly on the lack of independence of the TSO in most of the country. And the other issue is, yes, as we find also in the energy mix. The energy mix in the region is still really rely in power in thermal generation, and in some countries also in small-scale, expensive oil-fired power plants. And in some countries, there's more than 80% of the energy mix that come from oil-fired power plants. So, and in addition of that, the one of also the issue is the lack of maintenance of the grid. That's one of the main issues that lead to the inefficiency of the grid. So in the consequence of these difficulties, if we can go to the next slide. Of the consequence of these difficulties is the shortage we can find in almost all the countries that go on average on equivalent of almost 2 days per month, and up to so around 5 days for Nigeria of shortage every month in these countries. And this shortage have a direct impact, obviously, on the economy. Is estimated that 5 to 10% of annual revenues are lost due to the supply shortage. And obviously, the consequence is also direct on the industrial and service sector of the economy, and that impact directly the unemployment of the region. So if we can go to the next slide, one of the solution that can be put in place to face these different issues. We think that really renewable can be one of the solutions to face these different issues, to have cheapest and more efficient power generation that allow a more sustainable social and economical development. Unfortunately, this potential is largely untapped as of today. As we will see in the next slide, if we can go to the next slide. Now, as of today, we have 31.1 gigawatts of capacity as of 2020, coming from 60.7 gigawatts in 2010. The increase of 40.4 is mostly thermal generation. Only 1.9 gigawatts is come from renewable energy, and most of it is hydro. So in these countries, we still have a lot of gas and inefficient oil power plants. And as I was saying before, Burkina Faso, Cabo Verde, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Niger rely on more than 80% on oil power plant. So that's that issues as to be could be really faced with the more development on the renewable energy. If you go to the next slide. With the development of renewable energy, I was saying 1.9 gigawatts has been developed in the last decade, but mostly is still hydropower, and only wind and solar started increasing in the last year, reaching on the overall 2% and 8% if we just take the renewable capacity. Going to the next slide, we can see also that the renewable, next slide please. We can see also that renewable is largely concentrated in a few countries, like in the additional capacity, the 1.9 additional capacity of renewable in the last decade was concentrated for more than 80% in only Ghana, Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal. So one of the issue that we have here is to be able to spread more, to spread the renewable energy in more countries, because as it had been said before, the region have a really enormous potential on renewable energy. Just to have some figures in mind on the next slide on the potential of the region. We estimated that on hydro, solar, wind, and biomass, that the region is really rich of. The potential is the potential production is around 37 times the current generation, and the first generation, the first potential is obviously on solar energy that reach more than 2,600 terawatts or theoretical production. That's obviously a theoretical exercises to show what is the potential of the region, but is also really impressive to see how much unused energy is in this region, and how this energy could allow to have really more sustainable development in the country. The problem to untap this potential is the fact that the region need to attract more private investors to have to be able to develop this energy, and that's one of the issues that we can see in the next slide. Exactly, like the sufficient. The next slide, please. Like showing up on the investment, this investment are the figures without that not include large hydro. So it's investment in between 2010 and 2020 on renewable energy excluding large hydro. So wind, solar PV, small hydro, and biomass. We can see that only 2% of the investment in the last decade have been made in Africa, and inside of this $60 billion of investment in 10 years, a bit less than 5 billion have been invested in Western Africa. And just a small parenthesis to talk about off-grid investment. You can see in the no, just before. Say okay. In the off-grid investment, we can see that we have 2.5 billion have been invested in off-grid, and 70% have been made in Western Africa. So for off-grid investment, Africa is the biggest market, but compared to the utility scale investment in connected to the grid, is still remain really low. So if we look now in the future, what we need in the next decade. In the next slide. So here also is an exercise of evaluating how much investment the region need to develop the rest capacity. So still excluding large hydro, the rest capacity in this decade up to 2030. So we had 60 billion invested in 10 years in Africa, and in the continent to reach the targets that the country has made. We will need on average in 10 years around 20 billion every year of investment in for development of renewable energy, for the of the power generation, and of it we have 2.5 that should be invested in Western Africa. So that's really a huge gap that have to be filled, considering how we are, where we are today, and where we need to, where the country needs to arrive to reach their targets, and to attract this amount of investment. If we go to the next slide. To attract this amount of investment, the region has to be attractive for private investors. So this slide shows the main private investors in the continent, showing some of the main utilities and two of the main private equities that invested in renewable energy in the continent. We can see that most of the investment have been made in Morocco, in Egypt, and in South Africa. And in Western Africa, only Senegal and Ivory Coast have attracted private investors for development of their of renewable power plants. So one of the reasons why Senegal was able to attract is because of the scaling solar that the program was talking about Jane before, and also Ivory Coast have a more formal framework that allowed to attract some of the investment, but still. As Daniel was saying before, the lack of formal regulatory framework, and as was saying I said before, the inefficiency of the grid is really the two major hurdle to attract private investors to invest in the renewable energy in the region. So with that, I will let the place to the next speaker, Luca.
Yeah, thank you, Daniele. Thank you, Mattia, for your intervention and for leading us through this analysis, this detailed analysis. I think we have gone through very interesting facts and figures But without any further ado, because time is not on our side, let me introduce our next speakers. Marina Diagu, Investment Officer, Infrastructure and Natural Resources Africa at IFC. Marina, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Luca. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. So my name is Marina. I'm working for the International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector's arm of the World Bank Group. I'm based in Abidjan, where I cover countries in Western and Central Africa. I joined IFC 10 years ago, initially in the Caribbean, and since 2016, my focus has been on supporting the financing of infrastructure projects in Africa. So the experience I will share is basically based on what I've been able to see and live through over the past year. Just say thanks to the Race for Africa Foundation and NL Group Power for the work achieved, for the quality of the analysis and the opportunity to speak on this panel, as the subject is, of course, very much topical. So what has IFC done? I'll just speak a few examples, and some of the item I was planning to cover have been discussed, so I'll go quick on those to stay on track with the time. IFC has a long track record of supporting renewable energy in Africa and more globally, and this includes a number of firsts. Back in 2007, we supported in Uganda the first large private hydro in Africa, the Bujagali project. Jumping to 2017, we also supported the first IPP in Burkina Faso, Windiga Solar, which implementation has been delayed due to some of the political environment. In 2018, we also supported the first large-scale hydro power plant in Cameroon and IFC's largest ever power investment in Africa, the Nartigal hydropower dam, which is around 400 megawatts. And 2017 and 2019, basically the first solar project under the Scaling Solar program in Zambia, where NL and its partner won the bid, and also in Senegal. So that's just a few first, and of course we have done much more. Renewable energy continues to be at the heart of the IFC energy strategy. IFC takes a holistic view on what is needed to enable the deployment and scaling of renewables by focusing on creating a flexible and resilient power system that can absorb a high share of renewables. So while we have observed over the time that there is interest from the private sector, and my speech today will focus on the role of the private sector and why there hasn't been as much private sector involvement, we noticed that private investment in infrastructure development in emerging countries and in the continent has been slow. Bringing renewable energy project to a financeable stage remains a challenge. I'd like to discuss three categories of challenges, basically. So the first one, not necessarily related to renewable energy, the country context. We discussed on some of those issues already. The second one relating to issues that are specific to the renewable energy sector, and then project-specific risks, noting that each technology also has its constraint and limitation. So as with any investment decision, the local context is key to attracting private investment. One of the main challenge, which is paramount, whether we discuss regional integration, is the financial sustainability of the power sector, right? Because even if you have a well-integrated WAP, for example, but if the neighboring countries are not able to pay, this is the same issue. So it is critical for us to support the financial sustainability. We have the ability to work with our sister company, World Bank, on reforms and policy where relevant. It has been discussed already, but in most countries, there is a lack of cost recovery tariff, of course, because of the social implications, in particular, closer to election times, and also high transmission and distribution losses, main issue being on the distribution side, on the commercial losses payment from the government or certain entities in certain countries, which in turn result in a high level of arrears to the private sectors. In such context, it can be difficult to support further investment beyond the renewable energy agenda. Not expanding too much on this second point, but political risk has remained a concern in the region, as we continue to see, unfortunately, in some of the countries. And the last point is basically a perception of risk from some investor, or perhaps limited availability of early stage capital risk and other project development resources, which have constrained the rollout of infrastructure projects more generally. So now moving to the second set of issues which arise from the renewable energy sector, we discussed the grid already. The grid needs upgrading to better support the deployment of intermittent renewable energy, such as wind and solar in particular. Renewable energy at scale requires a good grid and also battery storage to support greater grid stability. Battery technology is evolving at a breathtaking pace. As performance improves and costs fall, batteries are making renewable energy solutions more financially attractive for investors. But with that being said, adoption of battery storage today still requires concessional financing to make it financially viable. And there's our solution that the IFC is also working on to support further penetration of renewable energy. And then on the second leg, there is also sometimes a lack of political will, fueled by skepticism that certain renewable energy sources, in particular the intermittent power, are expensive. So certain countries have preferred to rely on the domestic resource, in particular in cases where there have been recent discoveries, such as Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. Or sometimes we also observe that this is also due to limited knowledge of certain technologies. So in certain countries, we believe that some resources are not available, so we may not be pursuing, we being government may not be pursuing further those. And IFC contributes to raising awareness where possible on those various opportunities. Just pausing here to share a bit of what World Bank Group is doing in this space. It has been mentioned several times already. So to address some of these challenges without going into the detailed IFC toolbox, but World Bank Group has launched the Scaling Solar Initiative, for which Zambia and Senegal have delivered record low tariff generated from renewable sources. So there is 150 megawatt in operations today across 4 projects. The engagement is a one-stop shop that aims to make privately funded grid-connected solar projects at competitive tariff. Scaling Solar brings together a suite of World Bank Group services and customizable tools under one platform, making life easier for the investor, but also supporting the government in implementing the tender. Active transactions are being pursued in other promising markets with an ambitious target to deliver utility-scale solar at a competitive price to this market. These include Côte d'Ivoire, Togo, and Niger, which have also signed up for the program. Moving to the final level of risk that I want to discuss more at the project level, once we've taken a more holistic view on the sectors. Large hydro, but also some wind projects are often exposed to ENS risk, such as biodiversity depletion, ecosystem disturbances, or social impact on communities through displacement of population or economic activities. This has made difficult, we hear it from certain development finance institutions, to support some of the projects, and there is more and more scrutiny on conducting adequate ENS due diligence on those projects. Why aren't we seeing more wind projects, at least in the area? As it was shown on the reports, the wind is located in specific countries. In most of the region, in most of the countries in the region, there is limited wind resources compared at the continent scale to some of the region like Northern Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa, which have a greater potential and can therefore achieve better cost. How about solar? Solar still leads the way in the region, both in terms of available resources, as we've seen as well, and cost competitiveness. However, high solar PV material prices are expected to remain in the medium term owing to the COVID-19 pandemic and other supply chain disruptions. This has resulted in project delays. So this is a trend over the past year or so, right? Project delays as developers basically waited for prices to fall. Otherwise, the implication would be increased project cost and increased ending tariff. So hopefully this is a short-term issue, and going forward, the prices remain low and competitive. Would also touch on biomass. As much as IFC has not supported any biomass project in the region, we have looked at several opportunities. We do have experience globally, but there are challenges associated with the technology and securing long-term access to quality feedstock. However, we continue to explore potential opportunities, and this is a segment that we are willing to support, subject to identifying a bankable project. Jane also mentioned green hydrogen. This is something that IFC is also very much involved in identifying new opportunities in this space. So we should stay tuned on that. In conclusion, where does it leave us? Just sharing a few data points about IFC's role in the renewable energy sector over the past years. So globally, IFC renewable energy portfolio has doubled from 1.5 billion to 3 billion as of the end of last year. Renewables now dominate IFC's power generation portfolio. About 70% of the investment that we have in our portfolio or direct investment in solar, wind, and other technology. And we are seeing this trend across the various continents, including in Africa. In Africa, over the past 10 years, IFC has helped mobilizing 4 billion to support 2.6 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity. And our focus continues to work with the various stakeholders on both the public and private side to facilitate the penetration of renewable energy. I mentioned scaling solar already. We are looking into supporting the wind sector on the continent. We are hoping to see more wind projects. So we also have an upstream initiative on that, which is still at early stage, but which we hope to roll out. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that was useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, for being with us and for your intervention. It's very important for us to hear from you what IFC has been working on and what is your view of the market, what is your strategy and your program you're working on, your best practices, your challenges. Also, you mentioned about the scaling solar program, which is definitely one of the key movers in the market. That was actually able to attract and accelerate investment from the private sector. Thank you again. So let me now introduce Silvia Piana, Head of Regulatory Affairs, Africa, Asia and Oceania at Enel Green Powers, who will lead us through what are the main recommendations for the way forward. Silvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luca. Ladies and gentlemen, time to wrap up. I'll be super quick because I want to be sure to leave the closing remarks due time to the President of Rest for Africa. More than recommendations, some inputs that we found while doing this analysis, and that develop along three mainstream. So please, the next slide. The first one is regulation, and I'm going to go, next slide, please. I'm going to go very quickly because Mr. Palladini already explained all the details here. Let me just say the best regulatory framework is absolutely useless without implementation. So it's absolutely important that regulator or entities that are in charge of this put the focus on a timely implementation of the perfect regulatory framework that might exist. And also another point I would like to stress is the PPA. Bankable PPA are a very powerful instrument for de-risking because they allocate risk. And the PPA is bankable, so able to attract financing at a reasonable cost when it correctly identifies and allocates the risk pertaining to the different phases of the plant. So from construction to operation, even to decommissioning, and related to every issue that can happen during the life of the plant. Let me skip to the next slide, please. I'm really going to fly today. The second stream is the existence of financial de-risking instrument, because the business environment is still perceived as high level, high risk environment by investors, and this leads to high cost of financing. So it's very important to leverage on the monetary cooperation in the area in order to reduce volatility, to ensure stability of the currency, and to take all the necessary steps to ensure currency convertibility and transferability. Next slide, please. Here are the last points, maybe the most important point, because the regional integration and the potential for regional integration is so strong in this area. And as far as we saw in other countries in Africa and elsewhere do not have such a strong regional integration potential. So it's very important to leverage on this by confirming and strengthening the political will, not only at national level, but also to regional organizations, and some of them exist and work very well, have been existing for years, like ECOWAS, like WAP. So push on this, reinforcing strategic and the strategic partnership to reach this objective. Talking about partnership, also leveraging on international cooperation to attract investment, particularly in the interconnection. Here I'm really referring to network interconnection among the countries in the region. Unbundling, progressive unbundling of the TSOs might be very useful in this regard. In some countries, this already exists. In other countries, there are talks, and this must be pursued. Improved knowledge sharing, I wrote in the slides. I would add improve technical assistance from multinational organizations, but also from private investors. And the third point is to work to strengthen the trading market. This is already happening in other realities, such as the SAP in South Africa. They are working hard on this, and it's a potentiality that should be further explored. I'm sorry if I went so quickly, but I want to be sure to leave to Mr. Bernabé. I see he's already connected the time for closing remarks. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you for your inputs and your recommendation for the way forward view of the West African market for renewable energy. So now let me introduce for the closing remarks Salvatore Bernabé, who is president of Rest for Africa Foundation, CEO of Enel Green Power, and head of Enel Global Power Generation.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Luca. Thanks, Silvia. And good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Very honored to stay together with you today, and very happy to see how the activity of Rest for Africa continues day after day to at the end make possible that there is a different future for Africa. So I would like to start thanking to all the Rest for Africa team for the works that you are doing all the days, all the time along to make this dream of a brighter future for Africa possible. And also I would like to thank all the other people that are here today, because if they are connected, they also believe that there could be a hope for a different future for Africa. When I say hope, I start from the situation where we are. I don't want to repeat what has probably been said before, but we know very well that today the situation is not good for us. It's not good because although we see that there is a tremendous potential in terms of renewable sources, for instance, we are not able to harness this potential, and for several reasons. I would like to mention just one data that really hit me, is that only 8% of total renewable investment in Africa are flowing to West Africa in particular, 8%. And if we consider the overall investment that is flowing to Africa, is still a very, very little number. So is even lower the investment going to West for Africa when the potential is so big. And most important and more dramatic info is that more than 40% of people are lacking access to electricity. And if we want to speak about a brighter future, we have to speak about how we can address the problem of energy poverty, because whatever kind of development should go before through the issue of the energy poverty. if we don't address this problem, is different to giving a hope for people in a world that unfortunately due to climate change is also evolving into a worse place to live, especially in some parts of the world that would be more hit before the consequences of the climate change. And unfortunately also West Africa will be hit. So we are here to speak about the future anyway and to see what is the way forward. And I want to be optimistic about that because there is potential. There is a big passion about coming from people, coming from Africans that we intercept daily, and we love to intercept this passion, also to this willingness to change things. And to properly address this topic, as Rest for Africa, we are working hard to let's say remove the hurdles that so far avoided higher investment to flow to West Africa, for instance. The technology is available, the resources there, so we need to attract investment. And two very basic things have to be done. One is on the hand of the governments of the countries that we are also supporting through our work, to our activity, creating a regulatory framework that give stability, that give transparency to the investors. And secondly, try to work together with other stakeholders to develop some de-risking tools so that an investment could reach a minimum level that is considered for the private companies also. So de-risking instruments and a clear, stable regulatory framework are the very important ingredient to start with the new kind of development. And then one say, look, but once I have this clarity, when I have available these tools, what kind of development I'm proposing to West Africa? And our opinion at Rest for Africa, as it is written in the name of the foundation, is that the renewables coupled with storage and grids are the three main ingredients to guarantee a development that is affordable, because it's the cheapest one even possible today in the world. I think that if 10 years ago, someone could have some doubt about the competitiveness of the renewables, today is an evidence in all the countries. So when we refer to renewables, a massive deployment of renewables is not because we just care about the decarbonization and we just care about fighting the climate change. It's because it's the cheapest way to address the issue. And if we say that we want to grant affordable prices of electricity for people, I have to look and to strive for the cheapest way. And today is renewables. And then by investing in renewables, we will also contribute to fight climate change. Another important piece of the puzzle are the grids. Renewables, storage, and grids are a kind of development that brings to the country more peace, more democracy, because when you use an electricity network to distribute then electricity, you are creating bonds among the countries. You are creating a community of interest. You are going towards the logic of dependency. One country depends from the others. You are creating interdependencies. So there is a community of interest. And I have to acknowledge that a big work has been done in West Africa, the effort ECOWAS, but also then the WAP. But this is something that has to continue to evolve. So new transmission line, new interconnection line should be planned and built in order to create this other interconnection, in order to reason and to behave like a region. I think that there is an incredible opportunity that every country in the world is now understanding better how important it is to reckon, to plan, to work together in a logic that is regional. It's very difficult that one country alone could challenge and tackles the big challenges that we have in front of us. Joining the efforts and doing it at regional level is a winning recipe. So I really appreciate what in West Africa the different governments are doing, and I invite them to do more. Because remember, integration is more bonds among the countries, is more peaceful future, is more democracy. And renewable plus storage and grids create also the lowest possible cost recipe for the development that will be sustainable because it's the cheapest one, and because it's greenest, and because also creates job. That is another important advantage of investing in renewables. So at the end, I think that is clear the way we have to go. We also have, and I have to acknowledge in particular in Africa compared to other parts of the world, a huge enthusiasm, a huge joy of the people in joining also this incredible journey that we need to go through. So now is the turn of everyone within this ecosystem to do its own part. And we are here as a RES for Africa, and I am here as President of RES for Africa to tell to everyone who is willing to do its own part that you can count on us. We will be there supporting all of you to make possible a greener future for West Africa. Thank you a lot for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing with us your vision, and for the closing remarks of for sharing with us what is the way forward. Take all the positive things that have been happening in the West Africa and to try to push forward the envelope. I would also like to, of course, thanks all the speakers from RES for Africa, from Energy and Power side, but also from EAB and IFC for joining us in these webinars, but also to all the participants. I want also to remind you that the Connecting the Dots, this third edition dedicated to West Africa, will be soon available on RES for Africa website, and you can follow us on our website and social media. So stay tuned, and thank you for your attention.